Rolling audio. And in 5, 4, 3, 2. Hello, and welcome back to another exciting episode of DSLR Film Noob Podcast. Devin joins me today to discuss all kinds of stuff. Devin, what have you been up to, man?
Oh, this and that. I've been dealing with the rain over here in Chicago. We've been getting
Flooding?
lots of rain, lots of flooding. Actually been out shooting some of the tornado damage around the southern Chicagoland where we had that lots of flooding and tornadoes for some news coverage.
A tornado came through Chicago?
I don't think it was a tornado. Everyone keeps calling it a tornado. I think it was massive flooding, but people keep getting confused about it and keep calling it a tornado. And I'm like, I think it was just lots of wind and some water, but all right. So, because everyone gets confused by the whole like tornado warning, like tornado alert, like, they don't know what means what. So anytime they see tornado in the headline of a story, they instantly just assume, oh my gosh, there was a tornado. So.
Yeah, the whole tornado watch and tornado warning thing.
Yeah, you don't get any of that with earthquakes because earthquakes are just, it happened. There is no earthquake alert. There's no warning of an earthquake. So everyone's not confused when that shows up.
On my side, I've been trying to balance freaking stabilizer here, and I've got this right here in the corner. This is that Cam TV unit I was showing earlier. You know how many bolts and screws and things you have to adjust on this guy?
You didn't get the kind with the toolless quick release kind of thing going on?
This does have some tool bits to it. Like if you look right here, it does have these thumb screws to bring the unit up and down. And it's supposed to kind of keep it in place with this shield that goes over the front, but it doesn't fit over the top of all lenses. Balancing it requires, a couple of screws here, and then there's like little measurements down here that you have to use in order to slide it back and forth. And honestly, I've kind of over the last couple of years relied on someone else to do this for me. So this is my very first foray into this thing. So it's different. It's a lot more work than I was expecting.
Yeah, you've been having fun, right? You've been having fun. Have you messed at all with changing profiles and whatnot?
Oh yeah. So there's a 3 profile setting on there, and like sometimes if you don't hit the button 3 times and let it change over, it kind of does some weird stuff. I haven't even dove into the whole like software issue where you can set different areas, depending on whether apparently if you work in one country, you work in another country, it can change magnetically the way the sensors detect the position of the stabilizer. It's like, what? That's a thing? Like, oh man, really?
Yep. Putting an engineering degree to use right there is what it's doing.
Yeah, no joke, right? But yeah, so there'll be more on that once I finally get it balanced. I'm gonna stick with primes, I think, on this guy instead of going with zooms, just because that's another factor of moving.
It's so easy to get screwed up when you go to zooms.
Exactly.
And it's not even a glide cam because you're somewhat like physically touching it. Has a little bit of leeway. Like I remember I can adjust the zoom on my mini glide cam, and I could still run with it without having to like rebalance it necessarily. Just I need to be mindful that it wants to tilt forward and kind of adjust for it. But so it's interesting because everyone used to complain about those were difficult to set up and heavy and everything else. And then as soon as this came out, everyone's like, oh, this is the answer. No, and then it's like so much work.
Yeah. Okay. I used to have I think it was a V16 glide cam, the full vest with the arm and everything. And the worst thing you had to do there was like, tension your springs. You have to do the fall test where you tilt it sideways, let it go, and see how long it drifts to come straight again. And those settings are pretty easy to duplicate over and over again. I mean, it's a couple of screws. The plate on there had like 4 screws that you moved around there, and they were thumb screws. So you didn't have to do any work. This, man, there's like 23 screws total, and you have to like do one at a time, balance it this way. Okay, got that, okay, now do this. Oh, that affected this other, angle. So now I'm gonna have to tweak this a little bit more. And like they actually have to have numbers on there so you can be like, okay, I write this number down because that's where I got it to on the scale, and that seems to work with this particular camera and body.
And do you remember the images coming out of NAB of like basically exoskeleton arms to help people carry the load of a Red Epic and everything else in those gimbals? It looks ridiculous. I mean, not that like how you look is important necessarily when you're trying to get the shot, but it just looks like a whole lot of time and effort for I don't know, for something that I don't think is necessary most of the time.
Yeah, I was actually Cam TV makes one of those as well, and I was looking at it on their site. It's it's 2 for those of you not familiar with it, and I'm trying to find the picture right now, and it's not coming up right away. But it's basically just 2 spring-loaded arm stabilizers like you'd see on a normal vest, and they come out of either side of you like Dr. Octagon or whatever. And you have little holes on either side, and you put your handles for your 3-axis gimbal on that, and then that's supposed to give you the arm support you need in order to continually operate and hold that up. It's cooler looking than the backpack with the weird rope coming over your head, but
Sure.
it's still a little bit wacky. I don't know. Man, this whole thing, I'm saving a little bit of money going to my own stabilizer as opposed to paying someone to, come out every time. But I think I might stick with that just because it's so much work to set up and to get ready to go all for one shot. And then, you're done with it. You get your shot. And now you're switching over and doing all this other stuff. And then when you go back to it again, unless you have a camera that's dedicated just to your gimbal, you're going to screw it up and you're going to have to take it off and do something else. And I'm not going to use a gimbal for every freaking shot. You have like a couple of cream shots where you're like, oh man, I just want to follow this guy into a room and like turn and follow him a little bit more. And I need to go up some stairs and stuff. And you set up all that stuff just to, tear it back down again and do something else. So I don't know. Also,
where gimbals work really great is with GoPros, because they're always the same weight, and when you mount them, they're always in the same spot. So when you're doing quadcopters, or some people do handheld stuff for skateboard videos or something like that, the only good gimbal experience I've had is with GoPro gimbals, because you really just turn them on, pop in the camera, and go. So.
Well, that's where that DJI unit, I don't know if you saw it, it's shaped like kind of an eyeball. It's a circular deal. And it's basically, they sell a pistol grip for the gimbal that goes underneath of the DJI Phantom. And so the pistol grip basically gives you a 3-axis gimbal in your hand. And now with that, because they already know the exact mass, shape, and everything else of the camera that's always going to be on there, the programming for it can be fine-tuned to the nth degree before they even send it out to you. So then there's no like, oh wait, I didn't set this at the right spot on my frame, or my GoPro has some crap on the back of it, and so it's not quite sitting correctly. Now with that, you can program it and have it ready to roll. Maybe that's the way to go if I just want to have a gimbal around the house. I don't know. I'm gonna still keep messing with this guy. It's not getting thrown out, but man, I did not realize how many freaking screws there are to these gimbal units. On that note, time for the news. Time for the news. Time for the news. Time for the news. First thing we got up here on the news is actually the Zoom F8. I talked about this last episode, but I want to dig into it a little bit deeper. I started that podcast at 5 in the morning, actually, so I was a little bit loopy, but now I've had time to watch all the promo videos, get a feel for it, discuss it with Devin pre-show, and now we kind of want to dig into this a little bit deeper. So first, let's go over the specs here. And I did mention in the show notes, and you can check that out there, that it does have 8 inputs. We were kind of trying to figure out what the hell is going on with the 8 inputs, because it looks like the same shot of 4 XLR tip ring sleeve inputs on either side. So we assumed that it was just on one side and there were controls on the other. But it turns out there are 4 on one side and 4 on the opposite side. So if you use this in the field, you're going to have 8 wires total coming out of this if you're using all 8 inputs, 4 on either side. And you're going to have some kind of special bag or something like that in order to accommodate that sort of interface into the field recorder. They do have dedicated knobs for everything, so you can control volume on all of those inputs. This also has a full color screen. Looks like there are some battery clips that you can change out on this guy, but with all the features and Bluetooth in this, battery life seems a little bit iffy. Devin, what do you think about the Zoom F8?
I think battery life will be just as bad as the Zoom H4n and everything else that came after it. I mean, 6 AA batteries to run 8 inputs. I'm assuming that because it's like a big deal that they've got 8 XLR inputs, that phantom power is available for all 8 tracks.
Yes, it is.
It's so if you start running stuff like that, I could imagine 8 AA batteries lasting you maybe half an hour. I mean, it's good to see that they're, at least this time having a dedicated DC adapter. Because for me, it's I always was like really a mini USB cable to keep my H4n like on external power and stuff like that. There's or other, what was it, the Tascam DR60 also, I think it uses a mini USB for power.
Yeah, I'm powering that up right now with a USB plug. It's kind of obnoxious. I wish I had a barrel plug so I could just have like 6 plugs to
well, and of all the connectors, like micro USB has clips to it, even though it's not super secure, it has clips. The mini USBs have nothing. It's so easy to plug and unplug mini USB. So that always scares me if I'm carrying it on my shoulder and I'm out in the field. But I like the concept of having two SD slots and that they're XC as well. So you can put in the bigger cards this time and not worry about compatibility. So, and I know that SMPTE time code is really important for some people, but I feel like if you're on a job that requires SMPTE time code, you're probably using bigger or better gear than this.
Well, I don't know. Now, for that sort of thing, like I used to shoot a lot with the Fostex FR2, I think, which is a fairly robust 2-track recorder. And that unit, we plugged it in all the time to get time code stamps because it makes it so much easier in sync, drop it into post, and now you have time code. Or the other thing we were using if they didn't have a sync port was broadcast waveform. And as long as you clock everything ahead of time, you can basically sort by file and the files will line up. And so time code, that is really helpful. But where I wanted to jump in on this is actually the 8 tracks. We were talking about this pre-show, and this thing's going to be about $1,000 right out of the chute. So that's a fairly substantial investment. And it's about double the price of the Tascam DR680, which the Mark II version, I believe, is $599. The Mark I version of that is $428. And that has 4 tracks of recording. When you get to 8 tracks of recording, wouldn't you want to move to like a studio or an environment where you actually had a dedicated recording unit for that, Devin?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I guess I could see sometimes when if you're at say you're a small time band or something like that, and you want to record live performances to do a live mix, which isn't how a lot of bands, distribute their music. They usually go into a studio and do it that way. But I guess if you wanted that live atmosphere, then I could see you from your soundboard breaking it out into 8 stems and then recording it into this. But it's one of those that I don't know, like, I feel like usually then you want the full kit. Either you want big hardware and you want to be in a space where this all makes sense, or you're going to bring a laptop so you can interface with it. I don't know. I feel like they're trying to fill a gap in the middle in between, like, I need a portable audio recorder and I need a recording studio. And I just don't think a lot of people are asking for that because the environment's so much important in both of those situations. Where portability, I really need something small that fits in my hand that I can rely on and the battery lasts forever. And then on the other hand, in a studio, I need a quiet place. I need a place where I can control a lot of the acoustics. So this thing in the middle, I don't know, maybe they know something we don't about what the market wants, but I really don't see people clamoring for this other than like, oh, more tracks. It's like more megapixels,
Well, the times I've had to record a big discussion, where you have like a panel group and you have 8 or 9 people, I generally bring in a USB device, like an adapter device. I have a Tascam, I think it's a 228 or something like that, and it has 8 dedicated XLR inputs, plus it has 8 AD optical, so you can bring in another 8 tracks if you want to, so 16 tracks total. And that is exactly why I use that, is when I have a bunch of mics that I'm interfacing with and I have a bunch of different people speaking all over an auditorium or something like that, you bring it in, and you're not going to bring a field recorder in for that. You're going to bring your laptop in because you want to make sure you get everything. You want to have all the stuff there.
And all the control.
Yeah, exactly. All the control, and being able to, tweak the knobs and have everything. I mean, I guess this does have knobs, but it's battery powered. So you're going to bring this in, Barrel will connect it, and then bring all your cords to that and record it in the unit. And then the other thing that's a little silly to me is the Bluetooth interface for this. It allows you to control volume of different tracks and channels via a app for your iPad. So okay, so you're gonna waste more juice on this thing running Bluetooth to an iPad app that you're carrying this field recorder around, but you're gonna use your iPad app as a method for adjusting volume as opposed to the knobs themselves. Is that practical? I mean, maybe there's
No.
a situation.
I hate touch interfaces. I hate it when
Exactly.
you're trying to adjust volumes with a touch interface. I mean, a mouse is bad enough. If you're in, editing software or audio recording software, you're on Audition or something like that, and you have to adjust the levels with the mouse. That sucks too. There's a reason why we all like audio boards and we all like our fader sliders and our gain knobs and everything else. We like the knobs because we know exactly how we're going to manipulate. We can't just slip and do something by accident like you can with a touch interface. As well too, like I'm trying to think about writing volumes, like where you keep your finger on a fader because say, somebody's voice is really up and down and everything else, and you're trying to keep a hold of it. On an iPad, like you're not physically touching anything. So how do you know when your finger starts to slip off maybe and goes to another slide or something else? It just seems like a recipe for disaster.
Well, and there's
I
probably lag too. So if you're trying to, write a fader with someone talking and you're watching them to see when they drift away from the mic or come closer to the mic, you move on the pad and then you wait for Bluetooth to transmit it to the unit and change the volume level there. So I mean, I don't know.
The only time that these kind of touch or remote control interfaces I found really to be useful, and it's a bit niche, but when before the show, setting up a live band, having an iPad that can remotely control my faders for me just to walk around and try to sweeten the mix in different areas of the auditorium, that's extremely handy because I'm not going to do that constantly during a live show, but I'll be like, oh, over here, I need to tweak this a little bit, and without having to run back and forth to the soundboard after listening what's going on in the auditorium. So in this kind of a situation, it seems like they're just throwing features at it. They just keep throwing features. And I'm like, is there people asking for it? Like, is there a bunch of like internet trolls being like, what 8? We need 10 XLR inputs, phantom power galore. I don't get it.
I've only been on a few sets where we really needed this many inputs, besides an auditorium sort of event. And that in that situation, it was sort of a reality show, and they were doing lav mics on everybody. Every single person that was running around had a lav mic. And in that case, they did have a dedicated setup for that, but they were bringing it back to a head unit and then recording there. If you have 8 lav mics plugged into a pack that you're carrying around, that seems, I don't know. It doesn't seem
well, and part of it is what are you going to do in post, right? Because in filmmaking, you want individual tracks because you're going to play a whole lot in post. If it's something like a board of people talking, or say it's a conference or something like that, I know a lot of people just won't care to have individual recordings of each mic because they aren't going to spend the time in post to sit there and mix it back together. They'll do a live mix and they'll record the live mix. And if they need to tweak or edit, they'll tweak or edit. But recording all of these tracks gives me the impression that you're going to want to edit all of these tracks individually and remix them in post. And in a lot of just talking heads kind of situations, nobody's going to spend that kind of time. That's why, like, I guess small bands is the only thing that makes sense for me. And I guess on a few film shoots where you're doing something that can only happen once and you're trying to capture a whole lot of the acoustics of the place, I guess it could make sense. But
I drop all 8 tracks when I do record that much. I do actually drop all 8 tracks in my timeline, and I don't do a ton of editing, but I throw a gate on there and I set the gate threshold rather high. So basically it silences the track unless the person is speaking. So then that way, if so-and-so was a little bit thin because of the position they were in the auditorium, or I need to remove some noise or reduce a little bit of echo, I can still edit that track, but I put the gate as the first thing. So then it's only affecting that when it's in, when it's coming in. And I know that's like more than some people will do. And you're absolutely right. Working with that many tracks, you're starting to get into, like, especially for an hour-long or a 2-hour-long conference. I mean, that's a lot of freaking audio to go through. You're not going to want to mess with all that. But if you have like some general practicalities, it is really nice to be like, okay, I didn't submix this down to 2 tracks, and now I can mess around with each one of these tracks. Or, maybe Henry's mic had some hum in it, but he was sitting close enough to Diane that Diane's mic picked him up okay. So I use those 2 and like completely eliminate his track, as opposed to bringing the hum all the way back into the final mix. So there's pros and cons to multi-track recording, but this is a field recorder. This is something you carry around with you. Designed to go in your bag. You put something like a sound devices mixer unit in front of it, and then you bring your audio into this as your recorder. Well, this is 8 tracks. You're going to need 8 sources, and you're going to have to carry those sources around with you, whether it's a wire feed into your pack or whatever else. And when you get up to the number 8, that's getting up there. I mean, even if so you have your boom mic, you're splitting that out into 2 tracks maybe. So now you've got 2 tracks eaten up by your boom mic. You've got a couple of wireless packs on units out there. So now you're up to 4. Okay, now what else do you need? Oh, maybe I'm bringing in, I don't know, some kind of sub mixer mix from audio outside of the actual event that's going on. Okay, now you're up to 6. After that, what else do you need?
Right.
I don't know. I mean, I can't think of anything. He's like, I'm going to be close enough to my subject that my boom mic should take care of it. But God forbid that doesn't happen. I have some lavs that I can place around the room or on the subjects that are further away to capture their audio. And then from there, like, I'm 6, really, that's even kind of going overboard. I think, I've lived for years with a 4-channel mixer in front of a 2-track recorder, and not had any problems at all. And 4 is kind of, I don't know. I'm beating dead horse here, but what I'm saying is basically this is crazy amount of tracks, and it's $1,000 price tag. Battery life may suffer because of Bluetooth as well as some
Probably
other things.
terribly. Not even Bluetooth. I just think of how many preamps you're running off of 8 AA's.
Yeah. Running all that phantom power, even if you drop it down to 24-volt phantom power instead of 48-volt phantom power, you're going to eat up batteries like nobody's business. And this thing is using AA batteries. So 8 AA batteries, that's not a lot of juice. You're probably looking at, especially with a color screen and transmitters and everything else. I mean, you're talking maybe 4, maybe 5 hours of battery life. And that's actually what the problem was with the Tascam DR680. The reason it never took off in popularity, because the original one started in the $1,200 or $1,400 price range, is because it only got about 4 hours of battery life before it started keeling over on you, and you had to change out batteries on a regular basis, and that was 8 AA batteries as well. So even though this is a newer unit, I don't see them getting more efficient with power usage, especially with extravagance like colored screen, all kinds of flashing lights and volume levels for every single fader, phantom power on 8 tracks. This is going to be a battery nightmare. And $1,000 too. So, it's really cool. I do like that they're innovating, and they are bringing really new and interesting features to the market. I bet this is probably even an audio adapter for your PC. So in that regard,
like most of the Zooms are,
yeah, Zoom. That's one thing I've always complained about with Tascam's offerings is they have a USB port, but all they use it for is power. It's really simple to throw an extra chip in there and make it an audio interface, and they don't do it. But Zoom, even the lowest grade unit there, H1, has audio interface capabilities. They use the same chip all the way through. So no matter what, you can plug it in and turn it into an XLR audio adapter for your computer. And that's pretty nice. Maybe now we're kind of like beating ourselves up here because we started saying, well, we only need something like this for a computer plugged in device to record a bunch of tracks. And if this is capable of being an audio interface with 8 tracks for your computer, maybe that's the solution. Maybe that's why you buy this, because you're like, okay, I don't want to go out and buy a Mark of the Unicorn unit, or I don't want to go buy a crazy rack-mounted Tascam unit. I want something that I can record tracks with, 4 tracks while I'm in the field, and maybe 8 tracks when I'm at a conference or something like that, and interface it to my computer. There you go. Maybe that is the solution then. And $1,000, if you're comparing it to a Mark of the Unicorn type system, those are like $1,400 or $1,800. I guess the rack-mounted, dedicated rack-mounted versions from like Tascam and Mofo. It's not Mofo. What's the one that has fire in the title? Is it Profire?
I have no idea. Your audio knowledge is way beyond mine.
Anyway, the point is those are like $300 or $400, but all they do is dedicated audio interface. They are not for any field recording whatsoever. So maybe that's the solution. You know what? I just changed my mind. I don't know that I hate this. I just think it's only for very specific solutions. Okay, we've wasted enough time on the Zoom F8. Let's move on down the line in the news. This is really cool too, and something else I'm really excited about is the R9 Fury X from AMD. This is basically their answer to NVIDIA's GTX 980 Ti, which was released, about a month ago or so? That's their top-end GPU. And we're kind of concerned with where AMD was going, because with the R9 290X, they basically were like, okay, let's provide as much juice as we can to this, give it a 375-watt envelope, and, make it basically hot enough to cook eggs on so that we can keep up with what NVIDIA is doing. Now they're using a different memory technology, HBM, which is basically stacking the memory on a substrate interface on top of the GPU processor so that they can reduce the size. That also reduces power efficiency, it increases power efficiency, reduces power usage, and the form factor is really, I got to say it, it's cute. This thing is cute, man. It's like half the size, 6 inches compared to, I think my Titan X in my current system is like 9 or 11 inches. This is nice and small. It's got a water block on it built in, runs fairly silent. Devin, what do you think about this? Now that CUDA and OpenCL are basically line for line in Adobe's support, you think you'd go for something like this, or are you still going to stay with NVIDIA?
No, definitely, because for me, I always enjoy a quieter workstation, and not necessarily that water pumps are quieter than air cooling, but those fans that they throw on the graphics card, especially when they're really long, are just they're always kind of too small and they always spin way too fast. And you could get the third party kind that have like 3 big, like 80 millimeter or whatever, 90 millimeter fans on them. And they're a little quieter, but then they heat up the rest of the system. It's like there's really no ideal solution usually except for water cooling. And then you got to get a custom block, you got to tear the card apart, everything else. I think it's cool that not only is it lower voltage, but it's also, this makes it more compact. As well as, and I think it would make it a lot quieter than one of those little fans that normally tries to exhaust air out the back of the system, because I'm usually hacking my graphics cards so that when I idle, the fans pretty much turn down all the way, because out of the entire computer, those are the noisiest fans in there. And it's one of those that you can't necessarily easily just swap it out for something that's, better or has liquid in the bearings or anything like that. So I'm really excited about something like this, and especially seeing AMD wholly adopting the whole OpenCL. I would not be opposed to jumping over to AMD because especially too, the wattage, that's always a concern of mine too. You get a bigger power supply, it generates more heat. That usually means that you got more fan noise from your power supply. I like quieter computers, and this looks like it could fit into one of those really small form factor computers where your graphic card length is very important to you because you're running something smaller than a mid tower. So it's kind of like checking a lot of checkboxes off for me. And even though, it has slightly less RAM, in all the benchmarks, it's pretty much toe-to-toe with the 980. I mean, there's some categories where it's a little better, and same with the 980. But for the most part, this is exciting. And I'm kind of hoping to see a lot more of the higher-end cards kind of doing some kind of closed-loop water system for you, because honestly, I feel like that's where it's going, because, everything keeps running hotter and hotter. And I'm like, well, we got to do something about it, because running all these giant fans in my computer, I've got a turbojet that's sitting here, trying to cool off, 980s. So,
oh man, I've got the R9 290X in one of my systems.
Yeah,
and it's got the sapphire cooler on it, which
yeah,
actually that's one of the quieter coolers that you can get for an R9 290X. But it's 3 fans running, at full bore, trying to cool down 375 watts or so at full wide open, and so it's like, man, really, it's freaking loud. And I've switched over to water cooling on most things in my system just because I'm tired of that sort of like random low level hum that I hear in my office all the time. But now, like, I've got to find I have a small place now. I have to find a place for my freaking server, because my server is now the thing that's like humming in the room next to me. Yeah, exactly. And like, I'm gonna have to lock it up in a closet or find somewhere that I can keep cool and put it away. By the way, I'm sweating right now because I was promised good weather out here, but it's like 100 degrees and our air conditioning broke down. So man, is it hot in here. And
how about all those computers?
I've got 2 systems running in this room, and then another 2 systems running in the next room, and that's just generating a ton of heat. So yeah, I agree with you. I like seeing the water cooling. I also like seeing the size, because now if I wanted to put this into some kind of petite rack mount system, or if I want to put it into my HPT or HTPC, I could easily install that into a small case that could slide in between, something easy and nice, and still have massive amounts of graphics card power to maybe play games in 4K, edit in 4K. And if you guys are wondering, I've done a few tests. You can go over to DSLRFilmNoob.com and find them. OpenCL versus CUDA is basically just the difference in ways they send information to the card and the way that they handle it. CUDA is a different processing language for NVIDIA, and it's proprietary to NVIDIA. OpenCL is for everybody, and their hooks and their calls for different things to happen, texturing, rendering, and so on, are differently labeled. And for a while, everything was moving strictly towards CUDA, but now that OpenCL has kind of taken over, Adobe has released most of their plugins and their rendering stuff, even I think ray tracing now for After Effects in the current 2015 CC. It handles it in OpenCL if you'd like, and you get a lot of gain out of that. It's almost 1-for-1 in all the testing I've done between the R9 290X and the Titan X as far as output concerned. We're talking like 3 seconds difference for a 45-minute render. So, it used to be a big thing to get a CUDA card, to get an NVIDIA card, but now it's not so much. OpenCL is just as good, and probably getting better, because
if you like a few video games too, DJ, you also get to do that too without running 2 graphics cards. So that's always nice.
Yeah. So what I'm doing right now, because all my computer power is dedicated to rendering, I've got one of those NVIDIA Shield units underneath of my television. And when I can, I steal bandwidth from my Titan X, and then I play games on that while I'm waiting for the computers to render things out. But man, yeah, it's exciting times. The only thing I was disappointed on, and I'll say this before we move on, is just that the price. I was expecting the AMD to come in with a little bit of a lower price on this. The retail price is $649. The retail price for the GTX 980 Ti is also $649. So you're not really getting any savings out of this card versus the GTX 980. If they could have done this at like $55 less or $100 less, in the $500 range, then it would have been even more attractive. It's still an attractive option, but I don't know. It's kind of one of those things. The other thing that I run into, and I've had this happen a few times, is if you're going from one camp to the other and back again, drivers on your system can really cause you problems.
Especially with editing.
Yeah, exactly. Especially with editing.
Not even video games, just editing software will start to throw a hissy fit if there's two different things installed, even if they're not being used.
Yeah, last time I was doing side-by-side render testing with the R9 290X and the Titan X, it was like I basically, after I was done with those tests, I had to wipe the system and start over again because there were drivers left over all over the place, and they were just messing things up, and like it wasn't rendering out correctly after a while, and yeah.
There are people who do make utilities for cleaning out drivers if anyone's having issues with that kind of stuff that you can try before you decide to just format it and reinstall Windows.
Now, speaking of issues, something that everybody should be aware of is release forms. If you don't have your release form signed from your talent, that could be an issue. Now, I am old school, and I use paper in order to get my release form signed. I literally
You're so smug about it. You're so smug. I use paper.
I like trees.
And a pen. Ballpoint.
The textile feel of writing on a sheet of paper. No, I've never really thought about making that more sophisticated. So honestly, I just go out. I have a little briefcase with, some extra scripts, some release forms and everything else, especially if you have any talent that's going to be nude during the shoot. Getting release forms is really important because you may not be able to sell your product after you're done with it if that's the case. So I do that on paper, but apparently these guys have come out with Snapwire has come out with an app that is release forms on your iPad or iPhone, where you just basically sign it digitally, just like you would with these new credit card apps. It's pretty interesting. It has basically release forms for photography, Shutterstock, Getty Images, ASMP. It's pretty nice. What do you think about this? Are you going to start carrying your phone around as your release form?
You know what? I prefer paper too, and I know that sounds crazy. With the age that we live in and all of the technology we have at our fingertips, I usually do have installed on Android, because I'm Android and not iPhone over here. Keep in mind that the story we're talking about is iPhone only currently, but I do have some software installed that has generic release forms and things like that kind of queued up. So if I don't have paper on me and something is happening spur of the moment, I can at least get something in writing. Like, something is always better than nothing, because at least you have a leg to stand on. If you don't have any signature from them on any kind of paperwork, then you can end up, in a lot of trouble or have a fight ahead of you in trying to secure the rights to the content that you created. So I have an app on my phone. It's ready in case I've needed it. I haven't needed it yet. I'm always pretty prepared going out with paperwork. But much like you, I kind of print it out depending on what I'm doing and go there. Now, if you're doing a lot of stock photos with these websites, I could see this being real nice and easy. I know iPhone also has other apps for letting you do custom releases. Android really doesn't. There's like one or two that lets you upload custom PDFs, and you kind of have to make an account and go through this trouble. And like I said, I do it, and I don't do it as my primary option, but to me, this is the future, especially for a lot of hip photographers. They'll just whip out their iPad or their iPhone and be like, all right, you can look through it and sign here. And that way nobody loses it. They get emailed a copy of it after they sign it. So they have a copy of the paperwork. You have a copy of the paperwork. It's in the cloud. So there's a lot of positives to doing it this way. One of those that I just haven't really gone around to getting it all set up, just because for my workflow on Android, it's a pain in the butt right now because nobody makes a decent app for it. I think on iPhone, though, I've seen quite a few people use this kind of stuff.
Yeah, this is the 4th or 5th app I've seen out there for iPhone. Yeah, Android users no love yet. A lot of times developers hit the iPhone first, so that's just how it goes. But one thing I'm gonna have to look into, and I haven't done this yet. I have my standard release forms. I have like 7 of them for nude models, for, regular stuff, everything else. And I moved to another state, and I had those looked over by a law firm while I was in the Midwest. Now, I don't know if the rules and regulations change depending on the state you're in. I might have to find out what flies out here versus back home. Working for corporate production, someone takes care of it for me, so I don't have to worry about it. But when I'm doing my own projects on the side, I generally have to fill those out myself. So if anybody knows a good guy to talk to in the Portland area, let me know, because I might swing over and get some information or have that reworked. Always make sure you get your release form signed, guys, especially if you're putting it out there, even if you put it on YouTube or something like that.
Yeah.
If something goes crazy, you could see a takedown notice. You could even see a defamation lawsuit. You could see all kinds of other things that could really make your life difficult. So always,
and to go over a common misconceptions, since we are talking about legality here, is when you're in a public place and there's understood that it is a public place and other people understand that they are in the public. I mean, this doesn't count if you're like taking naughty photos of girls or something like that in public. That's still inappropriate, and that's still against the law. But in general, of above the collar, if you're taking photos in public, you are allowed to take those photos, even though security guards and other people on private property may give you some slack for it. If you're on public property, taking pictures of public property, you can do it, but you can't distribute it, you can't sell it, you can't show it to anybody unless you, the people in that photo, have released the rights to you. So that's something else too. If you're making, I don't know, YouTube prank videos or something stupid like that, you can't show their face without their permission, their likeness. Otherwise, they can come back at you. Most of the prank videos you see, they get release forms, and you can tell when they didn't, because they usually blur out the face because they don't have permission to use that person, even though they are allowed to film in public. It doesn't mean that you can turn around and sell or show off or distribute what you shot in public. So keep that in mind. Because I know a lot of people just think, oh, I'm in public, I can do whatever I want. And it's like, no, you can't, because you can't just take people's likenesses and start making money off of them. That's not nice. Yeah, and there's extra stuff if it's like a celebrity or something like that, where it applies even more so, and you have to be very careful of that sort of thing. Man, you almost consult always get something signed.
Yeah, consult. So if you're not sure, go on the conservative side and have something signed. Sometimes I have people on set that don't even end up being on film, and I have them sign it just in case, because we're shooting it. We're like, I don't really like this guy. We're not going to use him, but he was here, sign this. We may end up using it for something. Or even behind the scenes video. If you have a behind the scenes video, your crew needs to sign too. They probably won't have an issue with it, but anyone who appears on camera and you're going to turn around and show that person's face, they need to approve it. That's just the way it works over here in America. I mean, obviously, don't take this as legal advice. You should always go to a lawyer if you want something actually in concrete stone. This isn't legal advice at all. We can't say that it is. But these are things to think about and guidelines. If you need to know more, I suggest seeking out a lawyer, or even general lawyers have a pretty good idea about this kind of stuff. Yeah, one other thing, and I caught this on an indie production that I was working on. They handed me a release form to sign, and I looked at it, and I'm like, "You're getting people to sign this?" And he's like, "What?" I'm like, "Your like there was a waiver for all liability at the bottom," and I was like, "Well, you can't do that." And he's like, "Oh, they signed it, Like, I'm like, "Yeah, but you can't waive all of your liability to them if you hurt them on set." He's like, "Hey, they're signing it. It's not my problem." I'm like, "Well, I'm going to cross this off and initial it." And he's like, "Okay, whatever." But I mean, like, he basically covered every possible thing that could go wrong, plus the release form, and throwing it into the regular release form, and people weren't reading it. He'd hand them 2 pages, and they're like, "What is this?" He's like, "It's your release form for being on film." Okay. And then they wouldn't even, check or read it over or anything. It's like, man, wow. Yeah. Wow. And I'm pretty sure there's a legal gray area too of having both the form for the release and the form for liability in the same signature. I'm pretty sure those, since they're vastly different legal concepts, they need to be on separate forms with separate signatures. But that's something else too. Read, guys. Read before you sign anything. That should just be a general rule anytime in your life, whether it's for a house or whatever else. The other one that gets slipped in a lot is a photographer will sometimes throw in video as well as photography and audio, everything. So that way, if he ends up filming a little bit while he's also taking stills, or the stills get used in a video production, he's covered on that round too. So just a few little tricks and tips. We are not lawyers. Again, Devin's absolutely right. We are not giving you legal advice at all. Go out, find someone who knows a lot about it. I'm just speaking from the experiences I've had, and as Devin is as well. So make sure you kind of talk to somebody. It's a little expensive to get a lawyer, but a lot of times like $100 will get you an hour of consulting to just, or a half an hour of consulting to figure something out, especially if you're not sure about what you're doing. So don't just jump into this and then get your pantsuit off. That's a bad thing. Moving on down the line here. This is actually another issue that's come up with lenses. Sigma and Tamron both have announced that they'll be releasing firmware updates for their lenses. This is due to the 5DS and to a lesser extent the T6S and the T6i. Apparently, Canon is doing something different in the background with their focus control system, which is causing these lenses to have issues in live view mode with the 5DS as well as the T6i. That's weird, right?
That is weird. Not to say I'm not surprised that Canon would Sonic so that people would have a hard time adapting, say people who are using Canon lenses on some Sony DSLRs or what have you. That Canon, while it happens, is probably not a fan of that. They would prefer if you shot on Canon products because it's Canon. So I wouldn't be surprised if they might be migrating over to kind of a new electric drive system. It could be better engineered too. Maybe that they've been on an old system and they go, you know what, it's time we started changing and started developing a better way of doing this, and stopped with all the reverse compatibility with the old L series lenses. But I wouldn't be surprised either if every Canon unupdated Canon glass works on these, like the really old Canon L75 to 200 or whatever. If all those probably work on here just fine, and then your third party lenses are the ones that don't work right because of the new body types.
Yeah, I was trying to think about how they would actually mess this up and cause problems with third-party lenses, and they're all PWM drive for the focusing system. So, well, except for the new STM systems, which are stepper. But anyway, the point is the system itself is designed to be backwards compatible with all your lens glass. So I wonder if it's like, hey, I see that I've got a Canon L series 24mm f1.4 plugged in.
Right.
You're good to go, buddy. Like, oh, wait a minute. Is this a
I don't know what
24mm f1.4 art? You're on the work okay to not work so great list. We'll take care of that for you, buddy. It's
you're right. It could be something like that. And PWD, pulse width modulation, PWM, pulse width modulation, is one of those things that there's many different ways of incorporating it, and it involves a lot of electronics with sine waves and all kinds of stuff that they could just modify it a little bit here or there in a way that a manufacturer is not expecting their lenses to be driven. And then you've got issues where you're missing focus because it's overthrowing itself back and forth, and it affects focusing speed and everything else. So but it's good to see that Tamron, Sigma are on top of this. They see that it's a problem, and they're immediately responding to their consumer base saying, hey, we're working on it. We got an update. We're going to try to get these things working right with these cameras.
And no word yet on how you actually do this. So there may be like some sort of mail-in issue or something like that. So keep an eye out for that. If I find anything, I'll definitely add it to the show. Also, if you are a Sigma owner and you have that cool little Sigma USB adapter plate, you'll be able to update.
That's usually how it works. Also, a tip for some people, it won't work if you're very far away, but there was, for example, I'm not going to mention them by name because they're not a sponsor, but there is a camera place that opened up nearby here recently, and I went to their grand opening just to check the place out and their studio and their rates and whatnot, and they actually had a Sigma employee or a Sigma representative there with the adapter who was just doing updates for people's Sigma lenses. If you brought them in, he had the adapter to hook the lens into it, hook it up to a computer, and do the updates for you. So if you kind of need stuff done fast or something like that, you may want to check around with local shops. And sometimes the local shops will have the Sigma gear that they need, and they'll just update it for free because that's what Sigma does. They want to keep you happy about their products.
Yeah, that's pretty cool, actually. I've never used the USB adapter for Sigma lenses, but it's out there. It's a thing. I think they're $2.99, so maybe you
Yeah.
can sell your services to your local photographers. Moving on down the line, speaking of selling services, by the way, the Pandora DSLR optimizer. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and share a picture of this with the stream for those of you
You
listening.
should.
I'll talk you
It's way
through it.
different.
So this is a really different design. Okay, basically this is an Indiegogo campaign to create an audio adapter slash battery power pack slash light slash solar powered USB battery charger unit for your camera. This sort of falls in line with like the lunchbox that we were talking about a couple of episodes ago and that Devin has in his possession. This thing is a little wacky. First of all, it's on Indiegogo. So I'm gonna have to throw that out there right now. For those of you not familiar with the Kickstarter and Indiegogo, Indiegogo is basically the like, hey guys, guess what? If you don't fund this, the guy still gets the money and he can do whatever he wants. You know, so it's a little like it's more Wild West of this sort of thing. No, this is like everything in the kitchen sink. And Devin and I were talking about this pre-show. First of all, I know that you feel clever adding a solar panel to your unit, but is it practical? If you think about what you're doing with your stuff, are you going to set your camera gear out in the sun for, X number of hours to charge batteries? A panel of this capacity, you're talking like days to charge it up. So, I mean, it could trickle charge it, but it's not going to charge up 8 AA batteries. This thing is basically add wood to it to make it, classy. And then it's, the light in the front, I don't know. And it's a really weird shape. I know they've got a handle for it that goes over the top that attaches to the back. It's got a built-in speaker. It's got a shoulder pad. It's got some other stuff. Devin, what do you think about this sort of bizarre contraption?
I tell you, I'm not a fan of the marketing material. I'm going to hold off with anything super like concrete without having to try one firsthand. I mean, if they want to send me one for a weekend, I'll go out, shoot with it. I'll record myself shooting with it. I'll try to use it to the best of its ability and see if it's any good. But for the main part, just looking over a lot of the marketing material, it seems a bit silly, like they're missing the point. For example, when they talk about power, they say that their Pandora only weighs 1 kilo and an Anton Bauer weighs 3 kilos, which is fair. But then they say the setup time for the Pandora is 10 seconds and the setup time for an Anton Bauer battery is 6 minutes, which I'm kind of like, if your rig already has a slot for an Anton Bauer, say like a Logger's Lunchbox or something like that, and you already have a slot, it's 10 seconds. You pop the old battery off, you pop the new one on, and you go record. So it's things like that I'm like, I feel like you're not picking the right battles. And then again, with like the solar charger, I'm like, I don't want to pay for that. You need solar chargers that are like 6 times, 8 times this size to just, give a cell phone 1 amp of 5 volts. So explain to me how you're going to charge up your big batteries or even just extend the time. I wouldn't even necessarily say charging, but I'm saying, if you're outside shooting all day, if the solar panel added an extra hour or 2 to your shooting or something like that, I'd say that's reasonable. But with how small the solar panel is, there is math you could do on it that I don't have up in front of me right now to figure out how long it would take to charge something like that. But I'm guessing that it's not even going to necessarily slow down the discharge rate. It's basically just going to sit there and not do a whole lot. And they bring up other things like, the Zoom H4n isn't rechargeable over USB. I go, well, USB is the worst charging interface ever. I mean, I've got external battery packs for like charging cell phones and other gear that take 5 hours to charge because it's a 10,000 milliamp battery that's being charged over 1 amp of 5 volts. It's just one of those things that I go, this doesn't really seem like such a great idea. There's a reason why a lot of people don't do it, and that's because it'll take forever to charge. I mean, there's some stuff that I really like about it. Let's not stay, on the negative train here. I think for being a small kit that adds battery life, it's kind of got an interesting form factor. I'd want to use it in person to see how useful that form factor is. But for me, and they've got handles and accessories and like some shoulder mounts and stuff like that. I'd have to play with it to really see if this works for me. Because obviously if it's too heavy, then that's a killer. But
for the audio listeners, I'm going to go ahead and describe this here. It's basically
you probably
a wedge-shaped unit that's about the size of the middle part of your arm, of maybe a foot long or so. It has a solar panel across the top, XLR audio adapters on either side, and it kind of makes an L at the end underneath the camera. And underneath the camera, it has another XLR input, plus it has a level gauge and some switches and knobs. The armature for your shoulder and the handle itself come out of the back, and then there's a little set of slots across the back. They've veneered this with wood, and the slots hold your SD cards all the way across the back. So it doesn't, you don't use the SD cards in there. They just hold them, so you have extra ones there, which that also seems a little weird. The unit itself is basically flat and long and sort of L-shaped, and it's designed to go with your camera as far forward as possible, and then you put a grip on it, and you're supposed to push the long portion against your shoulder. So it's a weird design.
It's kind of like a shotgun mount, maybe you could say, like a rifle mount kind of thing.
Yeah, like you're designed to push it against your shoulder and have your camera kind of out in front of you a little ways. I don't want to be too negative. It's just looking over
because there's a lot that's right.
Like someone with a pipe dream, like. Definitely you don't need any solar panels on this. That's silly. The wood trim, like, let's focus on getting the product out first, guys, before we worry about putting wood trim on it. The shape itself it's interesting, but it's not going to be balanced. And I don't see anywhere for the shoulder version of it to have a counterweight to kind of hold weight on the back to sort of float it out at all.
Right.
It seems like it's designed specifically around holding the camera like in its normal format, not with any extras. So you're really going to have to be able to like grab the camera to hold on to it to make this a worthwhile experience. I don't know.
Right.
It seems wonky.
There's some, let me go over some stuff that I do like. I like the fact that it's got a rail on the right side, because that's an area that you normally, the right side of your camera, you don't touch, because most of our cameras are set up to be on the right side. But you don't, that sliding, I see them use it for the little receivers for the wireless audio. And I go, that's a cool idea. I like that. And also too, they're going to take their battery and they're going to conform it out into 3 different voltages. And I go, that's nice. Not needing another box to sit here if you've got an accessory or EVF or something like that requires a kind of a different voltage than the 12 that I'm imagining the batteries probably run off of. And the audio mirrors are right where they should be. I don't know if they're bright enough, but they're right in front of your face, right where they should be for managing that. I'm sure once you get it all synced up with your camera. So there's a few things like here or there that I go, these are a few good solid ideas. And then I feel like everything else they could dream of, they threw at this thing. And I'm like, I think you're overcomplicating the product. I think you could get the job done with a whole lot less. I mean, they're advertising like gold-plated connectors, and it's kind of like, well, I hope so.
I saw that and I was like, wait a minute, are we monster cables here? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. So, and same thing too, where they show against a shoulder rig, they're like, oh, a shoulder rig setup time is 6 minutes. Ours is only 10 seconds. And I guess if you set it up from scratch, most people don't go out on a set and set it up from scratch. It's one of those.
That LED light that's in the front's going to be worth anything. I mean, it looks
it's
small and blocky.
And it's in the wrong place too. It's below the camera. I don't know anyone, even if you're doing ENG, electronic news gathering, I don't know of anyone who would light from underneath the lens. I don't think that's flattering. They usually use an overhead light for a reason.
Yeah.
And that's because the lower the light gets, the more menacing the people tend to look. So it's one of those where I go, I'm not sure how bright it's going to be. And then what happens? You turn on that light and then the battery life falls even more. Don't get me wrong. I'd love to test this thing. I'm not going to buy it on Kickstarter. I already have a logger's lunchbox that I'm working out and trying to get use out of. But right now they say the MSRP will be $800, but you can still right now, there's, 60 left at this recording, the streaming, that's, you can get 50% off for $400.
Yeah. And I think the original deal that kind of made this sort of pop was that it was $249 out of the gate to get started for the early bird special. And so they sold 25 of those. It has been fully funded. So, I mean, that's good. It's interesting. And I do like that people are doing new things with this sort of device. Hopefully it gets out on the market. Maybe it's awesome. You know what? I I don't want to
Mhm.
be too harsh on this thing. It's a really weird shape and design. Not my thing, but it could be your thing. So take a look. You can find a link in the show notes. Definitely worth at least looking at. If you find anything
Yeah.
more solid on this, let me know. I've watched some of the videos and stuff, and it seems a little goofy to me, but that's just me. Now, what doesn't seem goofy to me and is really sexy actually is this Mitakon 85mm f1.2 FE lens. That's a Sony mount lens f1.2. We're finally starting to see some big wide open lenses, and this is full frame. It is kind of soft at f1.2, but man, it's got f1.2. And on the Sony A7S, this could be a low light monster. This is also in line with Metacon's other lenses. They had the 50mm f1.2 recently. I think no, that was f1.0 actually. So that is really sexy. Devin, have you taken a look at any of the images from the early release test shots?
Oh yeah, I've been looking at them, and I do see what you mean by soft, but not necessarily in a bad way. Because it's not like it's losing contrast. And it doesn't, I mean, not that these shots, I know exactly how they're taken, but it also doesn't look like that there's a whole lot of flaring issues, which is always a concern if you're going to open up that wide. But you're right, this combined with uh, a
The
low light
A7S.
monster could,
Oh man,
yeah, could really make some crazy stuff happen. There,
I know
DJ
this is
showing some of the softness at 1.2.
yeah, I know this is only a YouTube stream, so it's not very easy to see. But if you look at this f1.2 shot here, and then as they go up to f2.8, it gets pretty sharp. It's soft, but it's sort of soft in that like fluffy dream sequence soft, sort of
Romantic
way.
kind of way.
Yeah, it's sort of like somebody put a haze filter on it, as opposed to, that's what it looks like to me. And I'm looking at some of these shots. Here's some flowers and at the closest focal range of 1 meter, and so on, and it looks
Mhm.
really good. I mean,
Yeah, well, it's because the bokeh is so creamy, right? And
yeah,
that's I think
exactly.
part of the reason why it doesn't feel necessarily so soft, because the background is so creamy that it still looks sharp. It still looks sharp compared to the background, and so if you're pixel peeping and taking tests, you'll be like, oh, that's not super sharp. But if you're just concerned with having good looking photos and a good looking shot for your video, it's one of those that compared to the background, it's going to look pretty sharp. Sure, side by side, it won't look sharp compared to if you stop it down to f2.8. Like every other lens, it gets better the closer you get to f5 or f6 or something like that. But in this situation, I consider this completely usable, especially if somebody uses a SLR Magic 25 millimeter at T0.95. T0.95 is pretty soft and sometimes a little too soft to necessarily shoot somebody's face unless there's a specific style I'm going for. And most of the time, I'm stopping that down to 1.6 or 1.8 because it's just a little too soft. But these shots right here definitely look like, to me, they're usable. I'm not
Yeah,
I'm
by
not
the
always
time you
hunting
get
for the most
compression
sharp
running
shot.
on these with video, you're going to 1080p as opposed to full res.
Yeah.
You're probably not even going to notice the softness. I mean, f1.2 on the 5D Mark III, uh, it may be a little bit soft wide open in the center, but in video mode at 1080p, you don't even see it. It just looks beautiful. I don't shoot wide open all the time like that, and you're right. There are very specific reasons to do so. Most of the time, people get out of control with that sort of thing, and it just becomes
And trying to
too
find the
much.
focus.
Yep, exactly. But this does look really good. I believe the lens is priced at about $8.99. They are for sale on eBay right now. We should see them coming to other distributors in the future. The 5010 is still out there. Kind of been eyeballing it. Haven't pulled the trigger on it. I haven't gotten very many Sony A7S FE lenses yet. So, and in fact, all I've done is basically adapted Minolta lenses to the Sony LA4E adapter. So I haven't really moved forward with that. I don't know if I'm going to dive in and invest a ton of money in Sony lenses or if I'm just going to continue to keep my Canon lenses on there. But these are pretty cute, and cute, sexy. Man, I'm using these words constantly today. I think the heat might be getting to my brain. All right, moving on from there, we've got one question up in the chat room here, and it's kind of off topic, but I figured we'll throw it in before we finish the show. Basically, they're asking what camera we would suggest between the FS100, the A7S, and the PMW F7. Now, that's a pretty wide price range there you're covering from the F7 down to the FS100.
Yeah.
You know, there's pros and cons here. Devin, do you want to start, or do you want me to roll in?
Sure. No, I'll start on this. You know, you say you want run and gun. It really depends on how important that form factor is for you, because if that is all you'll be doing exclusively and you won't necessarily have a team or anyone to support you, then something like I mean, you threw it out there, so don't say that I'm saying, oh, you need to spend more money. But the FS7 is kind of built for that out of the box, and it's got the internal 4K, and it's ready to go for a run and gun. It's got your XLR inputs and, you know, your ND filters and everything else. And so while something like an A7S is smaller, by the time you get the ND filters, get an external recorder to do your 4K, if 4K is important to you, and all that kind of stuff, you end up with a lot of adapters and odds and ends. It's nice because it fits nicely in your backpack and it's light. But then at the same time, when you pull it out, you got to spend a bunch of time putting stuff together. And it's not necessarily a run and gun solution as much as something like the FS7. As for the FS100, I've really liked it. And I think that, you know, uncompressed outputs and everything else, there's a whole lot you can do with the camera, but the ergonomics of it, for me personally, have kind of killed it. It's killed it for me, and that's a shame because the camera works great. And I know with the right support gear and everything else, it works great. But while the price on it is really good, by the time you get that kitted out with like a good shoulder rig and everything else, because when you say run and gun, I think you want to pick this up and hit record, which usually means shoulder mounted. When I think of run and gun, you can run and gun with stuff in front of you, but it's one of those where if you don't know how long you'll be shooting for or something like that, shoulder mount just makes sense to me in those situations where you don't know what you're up against. Maybe you need a stable shot, maybe you need handheld. It's good to have those options. So once, and I'm not even saying you need to go with like a wooden camera or something like that, but once you get shoulder mounts and everything else for an FS700, get the ergonomics where you want it, it's become bigger, it's become bulkier, and you've probably added 2,000 to the price of it to get it all ergonomics that you want. So as much as I hate to say it, because it is the most expensive option that you provided us, the FS7 is kind of built for that run and gun. You can tell that they kind of designed it to be an ENG camera. So that's kind of where I'd be like, well, if that's important to you, and especially 4K is important to you, hey, it even comes with a handle to hold on to the top of it and a handle to grab it and hit record on the bottom of it. So for me, I say that it's a very flexible camera, and, you know, that would probably be the one to go with. But DJ, what do you think?
Okay, so I'm looking at the pricing here because I had to refamiliarize my price. I was thinking it was around 7,000 or 6,000 for the FS7, but it looks like it's actually $8,000. So,
yes,
yeah. So it's a good price for the camera, but it's also very spendy. You can set up an entire kit for that. So if you want the best, I agree that camera is the best, but it's not going to leave you very much in your finance department to purchase ancillary gear. Now, both the FS100 and A7S are going to require kit. The A7S, I've got mine kitted out with some rails and stuff like that. And it's not a super expensive investment. For the A7S, I think I have maybe $400 or $500 into the rig that I use on a regular basis. And so it's not adding that much to the price. And I think the A7S is down to like $2,000 or less if you can find it on sale. The FS100, you're going to have to spend a little bit more money if you kit that out. The box shape makes it really uncomfortable for running gun shooting. So they sell rigs and they're nice. Wooden Camera sells one for like $1,000 and some change. There are a bunch of stuff from Film City, which is the generic rig maker on eBay that you can find for maybe $400 or $500 from India. Those things will make it work, but that one's probably the least ergonomic. If you can,
and you also need to think about getting an EVF. With run and gun and shoulder mount, the FS100 does not have an EVF, electronic viewfinder, for you to use while.
It does have the flip out screen on the top.
It does have a flip out screen.
Sell the little slide on EVF, so you can.
But I'm saying once that's on your shoulder, you can't use that, can you? Because
no, you almost have to hold it like this.
You have to hold it in front of you, and now you're carrying a camera, which I'm like, if you're running gun after 6 hours of carrying a camera, you're really tired of carrying a camera.
But
so
I think where I'm going, though, is that with the budget of the FS7, which is going to put you at $8,000, you could really deck out either the FS100 or the A7S to the umph degree and throw in some lenses and pretty much have a full kit. So if you're looking for affordability and you still want good image quality, and 4K isn't your end all result, you're not going to strap like a some kind of external recorder to your A7S, and you're okay with 1080p, the A7S is probably my choice simply because the low light capability is awesome. Kitting it out, it's not going to be that expensive. If you go on the high side and really go crazy with your rig, you're probably talking like $1,000. Then adding lenses and stuff to that, you're still going to be under that $8,000 mark, and you can buy the 55-1.8. You can buy the new 35mm f2. Those Zeiss lenses that just came out, the 85mm and the 55mm, both look really nice. They've got some good zooms finally coming to the A7S platform. You can now get a 24-70 f4 and a 24-70. I think they've got the f2.8 coming shortly. So
yeah, and if you're gonna do run and gun, you generally want zooms. I've done run and gun with primes, but it's not always easy. If you're doing documentary work, you're trying to run around and grab a shot, zooms are super important. And then you want fast zooms because you'll usually be in a place where you can't control lighting. So that's where something like getting an A7S and a really great zoom lens or two really great zoom lenses will probably come in more handy than, say, just getting an FS7 and maybe a little prime lens to throw on it.
Yeah, the other thing to think about too is the FS100 is pretty dated now. I mean, it's only a couple years old, so saying it's dated is kind of weird to me, but it is. Sensor technology has moved quite a bit further forward from the time that was released. So, you're going to get the same visual performance out of something like the RX100 or RX10, and those are point and shoot cameras with arguably as good or better sensors than the FS100. So you're not moving forward with your image quality technology. The A7S, they are going to be releasing probably an A7S Mark II. The price will drop on it. That makes it even more affordable to shoot on. If you want 4K, my suspicions are that the next version of the A7S will have 4K internally because every single camera Sony seems to be kicking out right now has 4K recording. So that's another thing to think about. And the A7S is small and petite, as Devin mentioned. So, I'm kind of a price conscious guy. So when I usually recommend kit, I say like, look, what are you trying to do? How much money do you have? And it seems to me like I would set the $8,000 limit of the FS7 as your dollar threshold, and then just kit the heck out of a mid-range A7S, and
that'll take you a lot further, and you'll be able to accomplish a lot more and get a lot further with a full kit with different lenses and different maybe filters and options and batteries and memory cards and everything else.
Yeah, or even a stabilizer like this one right here for $1,000. Then you still have room to have a stabilizer in there.
Yeah, or support gear, tripods, cranes, all that kind of stuff. That's important too, especially if you're doing run and gun. A super light, super compact tripod makes all the difference if you're running from place to place.
Yeah, anything that can add motion to your shots is really cool. Those really small cranes, I've got one here it's called the Aviator. That's a great little crane. It's only 6 feet, but it adds like full up and down motion. Honestly, a lot of people think about the camera first. Don't spend all your money on the camera. You can go out and shoot beautiful images with a T2i, for God's sakes, and a T2i body will set you back like $140. You just need to focus in on lenses and all the other stuff that goes around your camera, because that's what will make the biggest difference. Sliders, cranes, any kind of stabilizing units, lenses, obviously,
lights,
audio kit, lights. If you spend all your money on the latest and greatest body, you're not going to have any money left over for any of the stuff that you actually need to finish the whole filming process. A lot of people will buy a nice camera, but then they don't actually go out and buy a nice boom mic. They don't spend any money on that, or they cheap out on their lighting kit and they don't have good enough light to actually film. It's silly to buy the best camera possible if your budget is small. If you have all the money in the world, by all means, go wild, buy everything. But if you don't, be realistic in what you can get. And anymore, you can do so much with even the lowest end DSLRs that it's not even funny. It's put professionals out of the business all over the place that used to be able to get work for $500 or $600 a day. Now they're not getting any work because these kids with a T2i are going out and taking over and doing it for half the price or a quarter of the price, and you can't even afford to be in the market with your camera rent and everything else. That's a crazy rant that I'm not going to get into anyway. The point is, stick with the middle range. I think I would avoid the FS100 simply because of the box shape. And the F7, it's a beautiful camera, way out of the price range as someone who's trying to build a little run and gun kit. That's that's a pipe dream.
Absolutely.
You're gonna have to get a loan for that unless you have a substantial amount of money or you want to sell your car and buy that camera or whatever. Anyway,
I totally agree.
That's kind of our answer on that. No more questions in the question deal, so we're gonna drop off on that. Devin, do you have a pick of the week, or should we skip that this week?
No, I want to rent the new Metabone Speed Booster XL for my Panasonic. It seems like reviews or some videos are popping out of it, and I'd love to try it out and
the
see.
Price, though, man, that's like what, $699?
$650. $650.
Yeah, you can buy a whole lens for that.
Yeah, I know, but it's one of those things I just want to try out and see if something like that with some bigger lenses is really necessary. Like I said, like we both talked about, I've, looking at the Panasonic lenses, they have some great lineups that are built for it, as well as a Voigtlander and SLR Magic make some great primes and whatnot. So
let's go back for a second and talk about this. So, okay.
It's one of those things I want to rent. Yes.
let's pedal back and talk about this for a second, because I've looked at this and I have a speed booster already. I've got the Metabones, the last version, the M43 whatever Mark IV, and okay, so this one basically is going to provide more light to the sensor than this version because it's more optimized to bring the image from the lens and focus it down onto the GH4 micro four thirds size sensor, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you're going to get a reduced crop factor, and this is going to what, super 35 millimeter? So
yeah,
like APS-C size-esque.
Roughly,
probably,
yeah.
Yeah, like 1.5 or so. So that's a benefit. Then the focusing on this is probably still absent for Canon lenses. So that's a minus. But you're going to get more shallow depth of field out of your lenses than you would if you were using my adapter, or if you're just bringing them straight into the camera without any adapt photo reducer or whatever, right?
Right.
So then I was going somewhere with that, and I totally lost my train of thought. But basically, I guess it's $650. Man, it's $650. I already paid $500 for this dang thing, and I only use it like every once in a while. You're right. Rent it. Maybe buy it. I don't know. Now that I'm talking about it, I say it out loud, and I'm like, wait a minute, that's kind of sexy. All the things I just said were very positive. Do I want to go ahead and just pull the trigger on that? Wait a minute, it's $650. Dang it.
Yep. But it's one of those things I want to rent and try out with a few of my buddies' lenses and see just to see if it's something I could really see myself using. I'm not even sure I would even ever buy it, but just to try it out, so that maybe if I've got a specific case or a client or something like that, especially if I'm trying to do some low light, because let's face it, the GH4 or GH3 is not a A7S. So for some low light stuff, having those extra stops and the big Canon glass and whatnot can be super helpful. So it's just one of those things that I've got my eye on for renting and trying out once I see it hit the shelves.
Now, I ran out right away when this version came out a while ago and bought it, and I can count on two hands the number of times I've actually needed to use it. I've shoved it in a few times just because I'm like, well, I paid for this, I should definitely get it into the shoot, but it doesn't get used nearly as much as I thought it would. And now I see all these shots, and every time Metabones comes out with a new adapter, people are like, oh, this is the greatest thing ever. If you don't have one of these, obviously you don't know what you're doing. It's like, man, really? Do I have to spend more money on another adapter? Is this really going to make my workflow that much better? And people have asked me before, why haven't you just pulled out of the Canon camp? And it's because of stuff like this. I've gotten used to working with Canon lenses on Canon bodies, and the GH4 with the micro four thirds lenses, the Olympus and the Panasonic lenses I use on a GH4 body, that when I throw something in like this, it looks good. Don't get me wrong. This is the Metabones adapter does a great job. It gives you a couple of stops, extra light into your GH4, allows you to shoot it in darker situations. And I like the reduction in focal length for the lenses I'm using. But when is it practical? When do you need it? Well, I already have a couple of Voigtlander 0.95 lenses. So when I need really shallow depth of field, I go for those. When I need more light, I can go for those. When I want to put Canon lenses on, I'll just grab my 5D Mark III and shoot with that because it works natively. I can half press, get autofocus. I don't have to worry about like trying to manual focus on there. And, I don't get weird errors every once in a while with this. Now, I did update the firmware on this just recently because I wasn't paying attention to firmware release dates. And the Metabones adapter has stopped crashing my GH4 altogether with the firmware update. So, well, then onus is on me. But I mean,
before we jump over to your pick, let me propose this to you, because why I look at things like this is, one, not just so much shallow depth of field, because I don't think that you need to crush the depth of field to tell a story. Mostly what I'm looking for is more light, so I can run the ISO lower because it's not an A7S. And then the other big thing is wide. It's hard to get wide, and a lot of great cinematic shots that I look up to are shot very wide. So here you're able to throw
14, my friend. The 7 to 14.
Just like we talked about, what was it last week, where they came out that micro four thirds that was it 2.8? What was it at?
Yeah, the Olympus 7 to 14 millimeter f2.8. So that's a 14 to 28 equivalent. F2.8 now, and I got it corrected on this. And I'll go ahead and put this out there just so that I've made the correction in the show. F2.8 is not f2.8 as far as depth of field goes for a GH4 body, because micro four thirds, the focal distance is different. So it's more like f5.6 for your focal depth. Your light, the amount of light that comes into the camera is still f2.8. F2.8 is f2.8 as far as light is concerned going into the camera itself. So keep that in mind. When I say, it's an f2.8 across the board, well, yeah, it is, but it's f5.6 if you're talking about the depth of field that you're getting out of it, but you're getting f2.8 as far as light is concerned. So there's your correction there. But basically, I use the Panasonic f4 7 to 14, and that's freaking wide. That's wider than most lenses I have in my Canon kit. The Olympus 7 to 14, you're what is that? I think it's $1,300, $1,200. So if you're paying $650 to get wide, you're halfway there to buying an actual lens that you can use for everything. The F4, the 7 for like $600. So you could actually buy that for $50 less than you can buy this adapter,
Things to consider. Well, do you have a pick of the week?
No, I don't have anything.
All right, fair enough.
I am my studio is a mess. I've been out on a couple of shoots. And
you're about to faint from heat stroke.
Yeah, I know. I'm sweating like a fat man here. I don't even normally. I don't even wear these like goofy thin shirts. I've got like, look at this chest hair sticking out and stuff. What is that? It's because it's so hot that like I was sweating out my regular shirt because I wear 2 layers normally. So that's enough of DJ fashion. Where can we find you on the internet, Devin?
ImpulseNetworks.tv, where I'm finishing up shooting some reviews of the Logger's Lunchbox and opinions on that, as well as a few other stupid little Kickstarter things and Indiegogo things that I am stupid enough to buy.
Hey, as long as they show up, they're not stupid.
That's the first step.
Yep. On that note, guys, you can find this podcast on iTunes, on SoundCloud, as well as following Devin and I on Twitter. Or you can also subscribe, like the Facebook page. Make sure you go to iTunes and write a review, guys, because there's only like 2 reviews up. It'd be nice to have some more positive reviews saying, hey, we appreciate what you're doing. Anyway, on that note, swing over to DSLRFilmNoob.com for more information on these articles. Check the show notes for all the stuff we've talked about today. And we will see you next time on another exciting episode of DSLR Film Noob. And we're fading out. And we're stopping the audio recording now. Yeah, I have no room at all.
We're always going.
And I totally bought this stupid metal art thing at an art fair that I have no. Now I realize I can't hang it on my wall because it weighs like 15 pounds. And I don't know where I'm going to put it. I don't know what I was thinking.
Put it in your lawn.
Yeah,
make it a lawn ornament.
Yeah, somebody's gonna steal that stuff, man. You put something out here, and it's just like But great show, man. Anything else you want to talk about before we get off the air?
No, I think we're good. We don't have any questions or anything like that. I'm good.
All right, this is stopping the live broadcast. You guys got the secret behind the scenes. No, never.
Let me talk about what?
I don't know. You had the look on your face like you wanted to discuss something.
I must have. I don't know what I was going to talk about.
Somebody says we should let you talk, man. What do you talk about?
No, there is nothing for me to talk about other than Other than don't buy stuff off Indiegogo. That's all I got for you.
What did you end up with? Is there a story here? Because like we're still live. You can tell me.
No. Because I'm interested in other stuff too, right? Like home automation, programming, and stuff like that. And so I got this thing called Clever Loop in here that it's early beta. They promised that third-party cameras were going to work with it, like Foscam and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And out of the box, there's no support for it. I asked their support. They're very responsive, but they're like, no, we aren't going to support third party right now. It's going to be a couple of months. And but the big thing is from Indiegogo, I just looked it up. January of last year, I ordered a home automation light switch that basically looked like something I could hack the hell out of because it's like a 4-inch Android tablet that then has a Z-Wave switch in it that you could wire into an outlet. So so then it's like it was one of those things where it's going to have a motion sensor. It was going to have Bluetooth. It was going to be able to wirelessly talk to the other switches as well. So you could like kit out a whole house if you wanted to.
Yeah.
I just grabbed one because it was like $80 and usually a Z-Wave switch by itself is like 60. So I was like, oh, it's running Android. I'm going to be able to hack it to death and run my own code and do a bunch of crap with it. Anyways, they just did another update. They haven't projected when they're going to sell it, but they've like reimagined it like 3 or 4 times. And I'm just like, guys, just come out with it already. It's been over a year. It's like, now we're getting into August of, so it's like been 8 months or something like that. I'm a year and 8 months. And I'm like, oh gosh, just because it's just like, that was $80 and they
just do some of that stuff with Arduino though. I mean, you can go
no. Well, and that's the point is after all this time, I'm like, I could have just like made my own shit. Like, I don't have to sit here and like, I'm like, man, I could have just done it myself. I don't know why I went on Indiegogo and got this thing because they're just not delivering it. They keep tearing down their old design and being like, oh, we came up with a better, and now it's slimmer. I'm like, how about you just show up with it? Fox did that. They didn't have a perfect product, but they finally showed up. So,
wow. Yeah. Yeah, with like the lights and stuff, I mean, what are you doing? You're basically like triggering a relay to turn large powered lights on and off, and you're bringing in like audio devices and things like that. So I mean,
well, and it was gonna, and it has a camera built into it too. So I was gonna do a lot of stuff with using its camera to build into the automation system. It also with having a motion sensor. It's like, okay, so then each room I install this in could have a motion sensor on it. To keep track of occupancy and stuff like that. So it was just stuff like that while I try to program up a house that could completely work without you having to push any buttons or use your voice. Because I'm kind of interested in that being a house of the future rather than like, oh, look, I can do stuff with my voice or I can do stuff from my phone. I'm like, I want a house that I don't have to do anything with. It just knows when to turn things on and off, which is almost like not necessarily artificial intelligence, but it's a complicated rule set. So it's one of those that I'm interested in like designing and for these little products that I can hack apart and start to make it into my own thing. And at this point I was like, man, I don't even know why I bothered because these guys aren't delivering.
Yeah, you can go. I mean, for the stuff that you're describing, like SparkFun, you just go over to SparkFun, get an interface board, a shield for an Arduino, or you go to like what's a Raspberry Pi or something like that. Yeah. And all you need is like 10 or 15 analog outs and some digital ends, and you can go get the sensors and everything and like wire it all together in a single package.
I know some people who've just done like completely closed loops where they just wire all their switches on in the house like permanently, and they pull out the switches, and then from almost they're controlling like the lines, like they're running lines out from there with a Raspberry Pi or something like that to control it all, which I think is an interesting concept too. You're centralizing all the switches in the house, but I'm not looking to rewire a house, so I'm not.
Are they basically like breaking it out from the panel then? So like right after the panel, they're like building a separate section and then installing all the controllers.
Yeah, and then they're running relays out there. So
yeah, the only thing is, the relays, they're pretty noisy. So
no, I know, and that's why I see people put them like in their basement and buy the like breaker box because they are noisy when they flip.
They do sell some solid state power strip units that I've seen that they're kind of spendy. Yeah, they're like $800, but I was working with a guy who was trying to design a light pattern system where it would bring up like a bunch of different lights on a giant board simultaneously and turn off. And he ended up using one or like 3 of those in combination because they have I think is it SLT, whatever that transmitting language is for lighting systems.
Okay, yeah, I think that's what you're talking about. Yeah.
Control information to all 3 of them and like bounce the information back and forth, and you can automate and control the programming of the lights. This is completely non-camera related.
Yeah, it's nothing to do with filmmaking at all.
Totally tech.
We're geeking out on tech.
And then SparkFun, man, anymore they're releasing a bunch of stuff where you can just use like a little
I know they're releasing touch screens for like $25. Oh, that's something else too. That Pandora thing that I didn't bring up above where they say like, oh, it'll like be modular so you can put in like your own chips and stuff like that, just like a computer. They show like RAM slots. And I'm like, that's not a GPIO. I'm like, that's not a GPIO. Don't sit here and be like, it's expandable and then show me a stock image of a RAM slot. I go, you're not going to expand with a RAM slot. You're going to expand with like a GPIO or some other interface like that, USB or something.
Yeah, some of the stuff on that Indiegogo page was
just sketchy, right? It's like a kid just came up with like, this would be perfect. And then they just made a huge list of it.
If I had Photoshop, I would put solar panels on everything. That would be amazing.
It's like really, it's the future. Yeah,
talking like a milliwatt solar panel. It's not going to charge.
And I feel like we could take this discussion into that whole solar roadways thing. That was a piece of garbage as well.
Oh yeah,
not necessarily a piece of garbage, but just inefficient. So apparently, I don't talk enough. That was the problem. He says that it should be 50%. You have sent me conversations. Way to go, DJ.
Yeah, now I'm going to tell you something. A little secret here is right now Devin drops out on my end for a little bit and then comes back on again. So sometimes when I jump in, it's actually because I'm not getting.
You think it's dead air?
Yeah, I think it's dead air time, and then all of a sudden, like the words come fast, and then it's like bam. And so I'm not trying to cut you off. It's just
no, I know how this works.
For the guys out there that are watching, that's what ends up happening. And Devin and I have kind of gotten a pace where we figured it out, and we kind of leave air between our words, but it's still not quite hitting perfectly. And I need to upgrade my internet. My wife can't watch Netflix right now. I'm doing this. And normally I have 2 feeds into the house, but the only other feed available is Comcast, and they limit you to 300 gigs down a month.
Ooh, yeah.
And so it's like, wait,
300 megs,
No, 300 gig is the maximum.
Oh, your cap. Yeah, you've got a cap. Yeah. Ooh. Cap. That's terrible.
You get 120 megs down service, business class, but your cap is 300 gigs. So, I could burn through that in, a couple weeks.
Yeah. You like, and that's annoying too, having capped internet, because, hey, your 5 Windows machines decided to do some service pack update that costs like 2 gigs per machine.
Yep.
That's you see then you're like, oh, damn, just wasted a bunch of data. That sucks.
Or if you stream Netflix all the time, I mean, it's really easy to hit that cap with Netflix.
How much is a 1080p Netflix stream? Probably like,
I'd say like 2 gig or so.
Yeah, okay, 2 gig, a little slower. I know they've got that Uber HD or something like that.
They've got 4K now.
And they've got 4K too. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been testing that out. And imagine you watch a couple of 4K streams, even if it's encoded in H.265, you're talking like 3 gig probably for a stream, because it's continuous down of like 5 or 6 megs dedicated in order to keep up with it. So
right,
I mean, what's that work out to in an hour-long broadcast? That's fairly substantial,
Absolutely, yeah.
All right, that was enough extra weird stuff in the background, guys. We're actually going to stop the broadcast now. There you go. I let Devin talk, you jerks.